watching Eye on Harvard, brought to you by In Time TV. I'm Ogan Gurel, and we have a very special show today with two outstanding distinguished guests. And also, this is a first for internet television, first for Eye on Harvard. We're actually broadcasting from Munich, Germany. And our guests are Harvard graduates or Harvard affiliates based in Munich. We will be broadcasting in English, of course, but I should say, since we are in Munich, willkommen, and we look forward to a great show with you. So we are in Munich, and we're going to have Jung Hummel, who is a prominent private equity businessman and in the turnaround area, and has a new fund and some fascinating ideas that he'll be sharing with us. And then we also have Dr. Frank Christ, who is the executive director of the LMU, the Ludwig Maximilians Universität here in Munich, collaboration with Harvard Medical School, and he's also involved with quite a few other international programs. I'll formally introduce him and Jung Hummel after the weekly Harvard update. So, the weekly Harvard update, we have two individuals in the news over the past week. We have John Thain, MBA from the business school in 1979. He's quite well known. He's the new CEO of Citigroup, replacing Charles Prince, of Merrill Lynch rather, replacing the beleaguered CEO there after the subprime crisis. And John Thain most recently was the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange. And his friends at the Harvard Business School recall as a very capable, totally transparent and outstanding individual. And so to the extent that Harvard can contribute to fixing this subprime crisis, we're very eager to have John Thain's input. And then in terms of another individual also in the financial field, we have Stephen Schwarzman, MBA in 1972, who has been fairly flamboyant in the media, but particularly as private equity has come under greater scrutiny and criticism. He gave a quite notable speech at the CBI conference last week, and he indicated that private equity, quote, is here to stay as a force and as a force for good in the world economy. He did note that private equity is very misunderstood, and as I mentioned, we have a distinguished guest, also Harvard Business School graduate, Jung Hummel, who is accomplished in the private equity field and hopefully can give us some insights into that area. So this is a weekly Harvard update, and I'm very pleased to introduce our next guest, who is Jung Hummel. And Jung Hummel is, there you are, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Not at all. He's CEO of Paradigm Capital Partners. He earned his MBA from Harvard Business School. In 1986, he was associate at Booz Allen Hamilton, where I was also spent some time there in London. He was subsequently an investment banker with Merrill Lynch, hence the connection to John Thain. And he is a very accomplished private equity person, hence the connection to Stephen Schwarzman. But what Jan is going to talk about in particular will be some new ideas, not just about private equity, but new funding ideas, and that also highlight interesting differences between Europe and the United States. I won't go into his extensive deal history, but involved in the whole spectrum of multiple industries in Europe in particular. So welcome, Jan. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
And again, as I mentioned, we're broadcasting from Munich, Germany. So tell me a little bit, Jan. First of all, obviously this is the Eye on Harvard show. What about your Harvard experience do you think was very formative and impactful for your subsequent career?
Well, I think that I would love to divide that experience into three parts. Of course, going to the MBA program at Harvard Business School, it's education and training. And the business school experience there is very much application-oriented with the case method. And at the time when I was there were two key components. It was implementation, and it was also people and how to incentivize people. And I spent 2 years there, 15 cases a week, so it was very much a compressed work experience.
So to some extent, the practical aspect, the case method, was unique for the European experience.
Yes, it got us an opportunity to understand American business and the dynamism and flexibility of American business. In Europe, we've had a lot of government involvement for years and decades. And that freer market spirit was, of course, a tremendous experience. And at that time, in the 80s, we had the Reagan Revolution, really also taking place.
And the Thatcher Revolution, which built on that.
Yeah, she latched onto that, and Britain had, of course, been in a lot of difficulties, and the government involvement, high taxes, and the revolution took place, and it was really just some simple concepts that she introduced in the UK. There was less government involvement, lower taxes, and the possibility with incentives to management and to employees of companies.
Yeah, I want to actually dwell a little bit on this difference in educational system. There's the cliche, and obviously I'm a guest here in Germany. I want to be diplomatic, but there's the continental cliche that the continent, and France, Germany, etc., in terms of education philosophy, is a little bit more constructionist and not as pragmatic and practical oriented. And it's interesting because I've been talking with Dr. Christ, who we'll be talking with a little bit later, and how he has brought in some of the Harvard Medical School curriculum to the LMU, the university here in Munich, and then further exporting that, or I shouldn't say exporting, but sharing that with other countries. So how is that cliche correct in terms of this sort of, I wouldn't say lack of practical, but more constructionist approach to knowledge?
I think that's very true, that the education in the Anglo-Saxon system is a lot more application-oriented, whether you go into law, business, or medicine. And it's historical reasons for that, that the education at the secondary level is slightly more advanced in the continental European countries compared to the U.S.
The high school.
Yeah, the high school education. So people can go into a very specialized education immediately after, as opposed to having that undergraduate training that you have as a generalist in the United States with a bit of specialization for going to graduate school. But I think that this general point is correct, yeah.
Right. Well, I want to talk about some of the differences now that apply to the business world between Germany and, I shouldn't say Germany, but Europe and the United States, and to the extent that that influences some of your thoughts on business and value, etc. We're approaching a commercial break. Our guest is Jung Hummel, CEO of Paradigm Capital Partners. We're broadcasting from Munich, Germany. This is Harvard. We'll see you very shortly. We're going to talk about some differences between the Europe and the United States in the business world.
Hi, I'm Michael Momando. You're watching the In Time TV network, where professionals save big time connecting with their community worldwide. If you're in the restaurant or hospitality industry, I invite you to tune in to Restaurant Talk, where you can email or call in questions, comments, or concerns. You may even be a guest on our weekly Saturday show. To see a recent tasty episode of Restaurant Talk, please tune in to www.intimetv.com.
When someone abducts a child, they're not about to advertise it. But we will. Sign up at wirelessamber-alerts.org to get free Amber Alert text messages on your cell phone. Help put a child abductor out of business for good. Wireless Amber Alerts. A child is calling for help.
Welcome back. I'm Ogan Garel. You're watching Eye on Harvard. Our guest, Jung Hummel, CEO of Paradigm Capital Partners. We're broadcasting from Munich, Germany. I do want to say that the show Eye on Harvard, we have been seen in 6 continents and Harvardians throughout the world, but we're not officially affiliated with the university. Just need to mention that. But certainly very much geared to Harvardians impacting the world and the world impacting Harvardians. We're talking with Jung Hummel about his experience in private equity and business in general in the Harvard Business School and the differences in the educational system. And the question just before the break were some of the differences in the business system. Jan, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, again, the big difference between continental Europe and the United States when it comes to business practices is that government has had tremendous involvement together with unions
in Europe.
Yeah. Whereas you've had a free market for a long time in the United States. You have a long tradition with that. It is changing. The change is coming on slowly. But politicians have made some very important decisions in Germany in recent years. We have to remember that. Mm-hmm. And Germany is making very good progress. And the most important thing what they've done is the lowering of corporate taxes. Mm-hmm. Lowering corporate taxes is something that has gone on gradually, and it's coming now on stream. The 1st of January 2008, corporate taxes are dropping from about 40% to 30%. Mm-hmm. Means that shareholders will get 17% more of the cake because they're now getting to keep 70% as opposed to 60%.
Right.
The other aspect that is
in fact, that's related to what Stephen Schwarzman was saying, to the extent that they're interested in the United States with taxing some of those private equity arrangements and concerned that they are not appropriately taxed. And to some extent, he and other private equity people are defending that in the United States to the extent that it may stimulate the type of dynamism that, in fact, Europe is going the opposite direction, trying to reduce the taxes.
Yeah. I think that, if we talk philosophy, it is important to pay your taxes, important to pay your dues, because we have a number of benefits living in a society, yes. Being it Western Europe, being the United States. So we have to pay taxes. But it's also a stifling effect if those taxes become too high.
Right.
And that is what we're changing now. Some other things are labor laws that have changed dramatically. Companies today have the opportunity to make individual agreements. So when we say that we have a 35-hour working week within the manufacturing sector in Germany, that isn't true. If you look at those companies, up to 90% of those companies have individual agreements with the local labor union or with employers. So we're talking about the 38 to 40-hour working week.
Right.
That's a tremendous difference. We also have social contributions that are changing and dropping within the next 2 years, which will increase margins for companies depending on industry from 0.5% to 1%, which is a big benefit. All this put together on a micro level makes continental Europe, Nordic countries, a very interesting investment opportunity. And then we shouldn't forget the introduction of the euro has been a great benefit for continental Europe. It's been approved by politicians themselves that they shouldn't underbalance the budget over an economic cycle. We know that the big contributors to the inflation we had a number of decades ago was wage push inflation combined with big government budget deficits.
So in the sense that an investment paradigm is to look at situations that are literally at inflection points or change, that's happening in Europe.
I'm convinced of that, and that has really brought me to this idea with great confidence to set up a fund.
We'll talk a little bit more about that, but you had mentioned, and we had the opportunity to have breakfast a couple of days ago, and that was very enjoyable. And in our meeting, you mentioned about the concept of the dynamism of the American society, where you had the quintiles.
Yeah.
And tell us a little about that discussion.
Yeah. It's for historical reasons that we don't have this great flexibility in the European society. And I think that is one of the most important factors that makes the American business society and society as a whole a very exciting place. The disposable income that people have can be divided in so that people come into quintiles. And in the United States, people that are being born into the bottom quintile, during their lifetime, they will move up to the top quintile, And that number from the bottom quintile is up to 40% in studies. And that really,
over the whole lifetime.
Over the whole lifetime,
yes.
Yeah. And that is really sort of the key factor of change and possibilities, the American dream, which doesn't exist to the same extent here in this society.
Right. And then so that brings up a phrase, actually. I'd be interested in what Dr. Christ says about this, but I had an academic friend of mine who said the ideal career is to be a junior faculty in America and to be a senior faculty in Europe. And in a sense, as junior faculty have much more dynamism, and which reflects the business and social environment.
Yeah. That could probably be a true statement, yeah.
Right. So tell us a little more detail before we go into the break about the fund and how that happened and some of the other individuals involved with that.
Yeah. It does have a strong connection with Harvard. When I was studying there, I had a professor by the name of Bruce Greenwald. He's now a professor at the Columbia Business School and one of the leading value investors in the United States. It's a whole circle around the Columbia Business School. And
the Benjamin Graham School.
Yeah, the Benjamin Graham School. The biggest disciple is, of course, Warren Buffett, and there are a number of other very, very successful value investors. We're very pleased to have one of them as the anchor investor in the fund, Gabelli and Gabelli Securities. We have a double concept here, two cornerstones of the fund. It's the investment in microcaps and value investing.
So it's not really a private equity fund. You're working with publicly traded companies.
We are now, since a number of years, investing in publicly listed shares.
Well, we're approaching a break. Let's talk a little bit more about it, as well as we'll talk about the Harvard-Munich just after the break. You're watching Eye on Harvard. I'm Ogan Gurel, and our guest is Jung Hummel. See you shortly, right after the break.
No matter where you live, life in the oceans depends on you. To keep our oceans clean, recycle and dispose of trash properly. To learn what you can do, go to keepoceansclean.org.
Once they've outgrown their toddler seat, they're still not ready for adult safety belts alone. 4'9" is the magic number. Until then, kids need a booster seat. Make sure your little pumpkin gets there safely. Visit boosterseat.gov.
Welcome back. We're Eye on Harvard. We're broadcasting from Munich, Germany. I'm Ogan Gurel. Our guest, Jung Hummel, CEO of Paradigm Capital. He's talking about his new fund, which is a specific, he can describe it better than I can, of course, but specific cap leveraging some of this change in Europe on publicly traded micro-cap companies. Tell us a little bit more about this fund, Jan.
Yeah, the fund has two cornerstones to it. First one is the investment in microcaps, and the second part is value investing. To start with the microcaps, it's a very interesting area because a number of academic studies came out about 25 years ago showing that small cap investors got a higher return because small cap companies developed better on the stock exchange.
Right.
Now,
At higher risk, I presume.
Yeah, I think it is even risk adjusted.
Okay. Risk
over
adjusted,
time,
yeah.
the whole group, the spectrum, the small caps had that. Now, everyone knows that, and Bruce Greenwald and I, we are believers in the efficient market hypotheses. So we're saying that microcaps, companies with 50 to about 350 million euros market capitalization, are such that they're too small to be followed by the big investment banks, commercial banks, brokerage houses. and there is a little bit of an arbitrage opportunity there.
Information, lack of information.
It's lack of information because no one is covering them. If you look at it, there are 8,000 listed companies in Europe. 4% of those companies are 300 large caps, and they account for 75% of the market capitalization. Mm-hmm. So the other 25% of the market capitalization accounts for 7,700 companies. And when you get down to the bottom 5,000 companies, there is really no research coverage. And that is part of our business idea, to scrutinize those companies. And the other part is the value investing. What is value investing? Mm-hmm. It is a discipline where you have a fundamental analysis of the company's products, services, their financials, their market position. And it's an investment principle that has outperformed all other investment techniques over the last 60 years. And still only about 10% of fund managers use this investment technique.
So that's a very interesting paradox. What technique would you say is the one that's most prominent?
Well, there is momentum investing, there is index investment, there is large cap investment, there is mid cap, there would be different growth.
So it sounds like momentum investment, you're looking at the momentum of a stock, and index, you're playing with some numbers. It sounds like one of the reasons only 10% are doing value investing. It sounds like it's harder work.
Well, you said that, but I agree. It is a lot of grinding. It's a lot of hard work. So what we look at when we look at these companies, we look if they have a superior market position. We're looking for local market leaders. Mm. These market leaders would typically have a position where they have some competitive advantage. Bruce Greenwald in his work has defined a number of important competitive advantages, and the most important of them all is entry barriers. Mm. Those entry barriers...
So building, in a sense, on Michael Porter's work.
Yeah, this is building on Michael Porter's work, absolutely, and it's taking it a step further. And entry barriers, how do you create those entry barriers? It's by being the market leader, because you can be entertaining economies of scales. Those economies of scale combined with a brand name, that is what we are looking for. And amazingly, people will typically tell me, well, Jan, I mean, these are big companies. The best example is, of course, Coca-Cola. But you look into industry after industry, you will find some small companies that have very high quality, i.e. their EBIT compared to their capital employed will be a very high number, high capital returns. That's how we define if a company has competitive advantages. I'll give you an example of a company that we've invested quite a bit in. Is a company that is producing fire and gas alarms for big ships. So container traffic, cruise traffic, oil and gas shipping, and fire and gas alarms. This is a company that's got about a 40% market share on that. We have the opportunity to buy into that company at about 6.5, 7 times EBIT compared to
which is much lower than some of the blue chip stocks.
Absolutely, those blue chip stocks would typically, depending on industry, would be trading 50 to 100% higher on that multiple. So that's the concept of value investing, and we have encountered a great interest among American investors. American investors understand this trend towards microcap, because this is something that happened already 10 years ago in the United States, and also value investors. So we had almost half of the funds in the fund coming from the United States.
Because they, in a sense, from an investor perspective, even though they weren't doing the implementation of investment, they have seen that picture before.
Absolutely. So they're trying to make life easy, to replicate what happened in the United States 10 years ago, now in Europe. And we're very pleased to get this opportunity. Yeah. And we're doing this together with our German partner, one of the biggest private banks in Germany, Hauck Aufhäuser.
What's interesting, we're closing with our time. You had mentioned about this timing with France just starting this process with Sarkozy, Germany in the midst of this process, and the Thatcher revolution back in the 80s, if you will. So would you agree with that timing assessment, that in a sense France is even further behind.
Absolutely. It is my very clear opinion that France is a number of years behind Germany.
With all due respect to our French colleagues, the Harvard graduates, but that therein lies opportunity, I guess.
Absolutely. For those who want to work and live in France, it's a great opportunity in the coming years, I'm sure.
We have about a minute and a half left in our time. What's also significant is Jung Hummel is the treasurer of the Harvard Club of Munich. In our remaining seconds, tell us a little bit about the club, its membership, its size. Just
Sure.
Inform us about the Harvard Club of Munich.
The Harvard Club of Munich, it's about 12, 13 years old. It's the biggest of the Harvard clubs in Germany with about 210, 220 members. We're very proud to have created the Harvard Scholarship, Harvard-Munich Scholarship Fund, where we are financing one graduate a year.
That's good.
So, reference to that, we also have this Harvard members.
Which we're going to hear about very shortly.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Jan. We're Eye on Harvard. Our next guest will be coming up shortly, Professor Frank Christ. Stay right there.
Today, we're moving faster than ever before. Even your ideal prospect will see your ad, click to your website, then decide to read on or read none in a mere 1 to 7 seconds. After that, you become invisible. So what's the answer? How do you capture and hold the attention of your target audience? In Time TV. The In Time TV network broadcasts industry-specific TV shows to the people who buy your products: surgeons, primary care physicians, dentists, podiatrists, chiropractors, hospital administrators can now watch live in-time programs on widescreen, on their PC or laptop while checking email. Shows can even be viewed on a cell phone during a train commute. In-Time TV is peer-to-peer TV that covers the hot topics in industries that you sell to. In-Time TV shows are broadcast worldwide via the internet, yet the cost of running a 60-second commercial is a fraction of what you'd pay for a display ad in a trade magazine. In-Time TV is what your target audience is watching.
Keeping professionals engaged worldwide.
Mom?
Dad,
How long should I wait for you?
if I'm at soccer practice,
What if something happens? Will you come get me?
There's no reason not to have a plan in case of an emergency.
Should we go to the neighbor's house?
And some extremely good reasons why you should.
Can you tell me?
Talk to your family about what you would do in case of an emergency.
Welcome back. You're watching Eye on Harvard. I'm Ogan Gurel. We are broadcasting from Munich, Germany, and we have our guest, Dr. Frank Christ. I wanted to, first of all, thank Jung Hummel again for an excellent half hour just prior, and we're actually leading into some of the topics we'll discuss with our next guest. Dr. Frank Christ is from a clinical perspective, is head of the cardiac anesthesiology department at the LMU Ludwig Maximilians Universität in Munich. But that's just it's a very high position, but that's just the beginning of all his involvements. He's very intimately involved with Harvard. He has managed, he's the executive director of the Harvard-Munich Alliance for Medical Education, which is both for the medical school and residents. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And he has recently expanded that to be the CEO of LMU-Munich Medical International, which works with companies around the globe. And so, in a sense, and we'll talk about this because I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Christ before, in a sense, passing on the baton of Harvard's knowledge, expertise, and education, adding this significant expertise here in Munich and passing the baton along. Welcome, Dr. Christ. First of all, tell us a little bit about how the Harvard connection came out.
Well, thank you for having me here. Just want to give you a brief history of this one. It dates back really to 1995, where we started actually with the program. It was initiated from some key figures really from our university, namely the then President, Professor Heldrich, the Dean of the Medical School in particular, and also Professor Winacker, who became very famous because he was head of the German Resuscitation Council, and he was the one who really, together with these three people, started to go over to America and trying to identify universities that we would like to cooperate with. And we ended up...
So in a sense, the initiative was from your side?
From both sides, actually, but it was initiated from this side, and we found some really interesting partners in Harvard, and then ultimately decided, after a return visit of the Dean of International Affairs here, and in particular also Dean Tarstensen, the then Dean of the Medical School,
yes, right,
to start our cooperation. And our initial focus was education, clearly education, because we felt that the new pathway, as it was then not that new anymore, but it was already 10 years old, had a lot to offer for German medical schools who certainly had a different perspective at that time as far as education is concerned. And so
for some of our viewers who are not exclusively in the medical area, the New Pathway was an innovative program by the Harvard Medical School in the late 80s. And to some extent, part of the program, which has gone beyond that, was to bring that new pathway paradigm here in Munich.
Yeah, so
tell us a little bit more about that, because our audience is obviously broadly based.
Sure. It really is also the case method being introduced at the medical training.
Which is just like what Jan
was telling you about as well in the business school. Slightly different in the medical school. It starts really with the first years in a different setup. It tried to teach us the fundamentals really of medical knowledge in the case-based method. Originated actually somewhere else, in Case Western in particular, and also in Master here in Europe, but Harvard really executed that very nicely. Excellent program. And we really took it on us to introduce this sort of training concept for our medical students. Challenge was that our medical school has so many more medical students. We have 4,500 medical students.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference as far as sort of logistics.
Because the medical program is a little different too, and in Europe in general it starts at the undergraduate level essentially. That's why you have more medical students that get winnowed down, if you will.
Well, as a matter of fact, yes, it's true. I mean, they start typically when they're about 19 years old, so they can
it's not quite the same undergraduate.
It's not quite the same. As Jan already referred to, our, I think, university qualification theme from the high schools is slightly different, a bit more challenging. We have no college period in between.
Yes.
So really, the beginning of the medical school is slightly different, but out of the program, we really learned that the last 4 years, at the end of the day, not that much different to what actually is happening in the other American medical schools as well.
Right. So the initial aspect was education, but you said that has expanded. So the Harvard-Munich Alliance, tell us how that has gone beyond just bringing the new pathway.
As we then really reformed a lot of our training of our medical students, we then went on to look at training of residents, but besides that also obviously to look at expanding that knowledge into other universities. And we started off with the universities here in Germany, and then basically together with our Harvard colleagues started to run programs in other countries, namely, very interestingly, those who have sort of a combined interest in Harvard on the one hand side, but also some of the German aspects.
So in a sense, you're a bridge.
In a way,
more
that's
than a bridge. I don't want to...
No, I think bridging is absolutely right, and what it bridges is really interesting. I can give you the example of Tokyo University, Tokyo Medical and Dental University. We've done a program together with the Harvard Medical School there, and that is still going on, that program. And if you look at Tokyo Medical and Dental, or most of the Japanese universities have a very traditional German structure.
The
way they are organized, the way they're doing, and at the same time, obviously, they're very far away from the typical private American setup that you see in a lot of the medical schools. So combining this together was very interesting for third parties.
So actually, that's interesting. That's fascinating to the extent that, let's say, Harvard went straight to the Tokyo institutions. It would be so radically different. But by working through you or with you, since they were patterned on the German system, it probably facilitated that.
That is exactly the idea behind it. That's why we got involved in that, and that specifically allowed, to find solutions who basically are more suitable for the cultural background in Japan than if you would just go as an American institution. A similar situation happened for some of the East European universities here, namely the University in Zagreb, a program we also done together with Harvard. After that, we actually did our own programs that we are running at other universities in the East in particular. So I think this was a very exciting period to really look at how to find new solutions on training doctors, how to find new solutions, how to get key features across that are absolutely mandatory for every doctor to get out of the university.
And there are also some classical, I should say, or traditional, essentially exchange student or exchange resident aspects to this. The students were coming over to the Harvard hospitals. I know that I worked with some of them, and they were outstanding. Were Harvard students also coming? Tell us a little bit about the exchange student part.
Okay, we have, right at the beginning, we had a special program that really selected the best 10 to 15 medical students from our university and allowed them to go to Harvard Medical School for a period of 4, initially it was 6 months, but now it's 4 months. And that program has been a huge success. We have more than 150 students now in Harvard over the past 12 years. And certainly the uniqueness about this program was not only that it was a very special experience for the students, it was in particular also because they took something back to our university. They got involved in our curriculum reform. As a matter of fact, fundamental parts of the latest curriculum of our medical school has been designed by those students. And that is...
So that you really, in a sense, in a meta sense, the immigration, I mean, bringing where the younger actually institutes the change.
That is, I think, a unique process in a medical school, certainly for a traditional one like this one, has been extremely successful, and it got a degree of involvement of the students that you have not seen in many other medical schools around the world.
Well, we're approaching a break. We're here at ION Harvard. Our guest, Dr. Frank Christ, who's the Executive Director of the Harvard-Munich Medical Alliance. We have some more fascinating things about the whole international aspect. And we'll be right back right after this break. Stay right there.
My pot of gold, your daddy's little girl, till heaven home.
It's easy to tell if you've had way too many. But what if you've had just one too many? Buzz driving is drunk driving.
Hey guys, thanks for coming.
Are we in trouble?
No, you're not in trouble. I just want to set some ground rules.
Like what?
Well, remember last week when you hit Vinny in the head with the shovel?
I do not recall that.
Of course not. Well, it was pretty graphic. Too graphic for the kids. So I'm going to have to block you.
I got to make this up to you. This is Vinny's watch, and I want you to have it. You deserve it.
Thank you. That's really not necessary.
No. Come here.
Welcome back. I'm Ogan Burrell. You're watching In Time TV's ION Harvard. Our guest, Dr. Frank Christ, the Chief of Cardiac Anesthesiology at LMU University here in Munich, and also Executive Director of the Harvard-Munich Medical Alliance, and also CEO of LMU-Munich Medical International. Now, we talked a little bit about the Medical Alliance. We talked about the educational aspect. We talked about the exchange aspect. Tell us about this very exciting LMU Medical International, which goes beyond the Harvard experience, if I understand it correctly.
The LMU Munich Medical International is an organization that is entirely owned and hosted by the Munich University and has the aim to export really know-how worldwide. And this is a bit of a new page for German universities. It's a very well-established one for other universities, particularly in America. And this institution really makes, in particular, medical know-how available. It focuses on healthcare services, includes healthcare areas. We are having a strong focus of the Middle East, in particular the United Emirates, but also with the Qatar. We have some projects running in Saudi Arabia. And this is really something that allows us to really share some of the European aspects of healthcare with the people with that side. Yes, I would say in this context particular, European, but Western, of course, as well, in a different way. And what we're doing there is really all sorts of sort of advice on the one hand side. On the other hand, we sort of, restructuring some of these organizations, in particular in the areas of emergency medicine. So it's a big project at the moment, for example, looking at the emergency services provided for the Emirates, and here in particular Northern Emirates, where trauma is the leading cause of death.
And they're very young populations.
It's an extremely young population. The average age of people that basically are involved in trauma is about 25. So
that's probably the average age of the population.
And the average age is about 28, something like that is below 30. So you have a very dynamic situation, and if you then imagine that is really the main killer of that society, you really have a big challenge ahead. And we are involved in a lot of things over there. That includes, building up a helicopter fleet and looking at some of the trauma aspects of the area.
So it's not necessarily sharing a specific, unique clinical treatment expertise, but almost around processes and services.
Absolutely.
Obviously clinically oriented, but more the whole package.
I think that describes it extremely well. It's more really orientated towards processes than it is on individual treatment, because obviously in that region as well, you have extremely well-trained doctors. You have a lot of competence away. You have people around who really have been, really in the top institutions in the world, and already there's very good healthcare available in the region. However, on a structural level, it isn't. And for that reason, really, most of these communities are investing now very, very heavily into improving the infrastructure of the healthcare system itself. They find unique solutions, and I think this is extremely exciting for me, because you now see societies really finding different pathways which are different to what solutions we have found, or like the American society.
So we can learn from them.
And we can also learn from them. For example, very, very strongly in healthcare, people really in the Middle East focusing on really equal access. It's extremely important. Everybody equality of what services provided for people, and also that you really look after those who are left behind financially. And this is something that they feel very, very strong about, and so that healthcare system has to provide for that.
Well, I think that this is personally, I also feel this is very important, the whole area of medical diplomacy, which is not necessarily equivalent to, because that involves some governmental influences, but overlaps. Essentially, diplomacy is about between peoples, and even if you're a tourist somewhere, you're being a diplomat. You may not have that title. And it's very interesting that you say about not necessarily exporting the expertise, but the processes that enable that expertise, because medical diplomacy can quickly become medical arrogance, which does the opposite effect.
Absolutely, and I think one has to be fully aware, particularly in that region, like in most of those countries who are moving extremely fast, they have really identified healthcare as one of the key issues that they have to provide on a very high level in order to keep a very good workforce in the country.
Right.
And they have suffered really very badly on just receiving advice and not building up the know-how.
Yes.
And clearly, if you look now...
Or even worse, as in pure aid, and I'm not saying that medical aid is bad, but just actually delivering the care and then leaving.
Exactly. So if you look at them, all of these healthcare systems now are focusing on building their own competence on a very high level, trying to generate that know-how in the country, and that involves, besides specific healthcare, particularly also aspects of research, for example, and training concepts.
Right.
And that's what we are providing. We have, for example, a big ultrasound academy in Dubai where we really teach how to use ultrasound in the various medical diagnostics. So that is something that sort of is a typical sort of transfer of know-how that we are providing in order to generate the competence in the region.
So one question, putting this in a framework, you have the Harvard Medical Alliance, which is, in a sense, bilateral. Then there are elements of that go to other universities and even other countries. And then you have LMU-Munich International, which doesn't necessarily involve Harvard.
It's exactly the right formulation. Not necessarily, but however, we also in that setup do a lot of projects together. A good example is we are having a cooperative work on a simulation center and a simulation center in Dubai, a big one. And, well, you will find the biggest one will be in Dubai now. It actually will be owned by Harvard, and it will be run by them, but we designed it, and our expertise basically came there. It was a classic collaborative effort where basically our team, with our expertise, went into that simulation center, and basically now it's been built at the setup in Dubai healthcare setting.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about going back to this exchange program. So some Harvard students came over here.
That's right. We also had Harvard students coming over here.
You can be very candid. How were they?
They were exceptionally nice people, and it was a great experience to have them here because, I think you would have such a great benefit from this type of cultural exchange. People see universities in a different light, that's one thing, but also really you can benefit a lot from the professionalism of some of the students when they were really in the context here of the university. So certainly that was a wonderful thing to have Harvard medical students here at our university.
Well, we're approaching a break. One last question just before we go into the break, we'll be back. Has any of those Harvard students actually been in the state of California?
Some stuff here, but generally they go back because obviously financial aspects, I think, is one of the major reasons.
Yeah, it's a rhetorical question. But that's great. We'll be right back. We're Eye on Harvard, Dr. Frank Christ. Stay right there.
Any questions?
No.
You know.
We're not magicians, we can't read your mind.
We answer questions, each and every kind.
What are the side effects, doctor, doctor?
How many times have you done this before?
Questions are the answer.
Will this react with my other medicine?
Hey, what are all these tests even for? You have the power to say what's on your mind. We need your questions, each and every kind. Questions are the answer. Questions are the answer.
Welcome back. I'm Algan Garel. You're watching Eye on Harvard, brought to you by In Time TV. I hope our production team can put up the picture of Munich up there. But we are broadcasting from Munich, Germany, and our guests are Jung Hummel and Dr. Frank Christ of the Ludwig Maximilian Universität here in Munich. We're talking about Munich International and all that. And there's a very interesting point, actually. Jan pointed this out during the break. So we're really having a collaborative work among all our guests. But Western medicine is certainly there's a lot of debate in the United States, and I think there's debate in Europe as well, maybe to a lesser extent. It's not perfect. So tell us about this dichotomy or potential contradiction between sharing processes, but we ourselves are not necessarily pleased with the way hospitals are run or the way healthcare service is delivered. How does that figure into all this?
I think this is a very important point that you said. I would stress, first of all, that it's sharing experiences. It can never be an export because each society has to define clearly the value set.
And it's where they diplomacy.
That would they really base their healthcare on. And the value set is the most important part. Of course, there are fundamental scientific things of direct healthcare delivery that are the same wherever you look. If you look at traditional, Western or scientifically oriented medicine. However, each of them have to be placed in a cultural context. So healthcare is always about cultural context as well. And for that reason, it's extremely important that you can share certain processes to have some parts of it, aspects of it running efficiently. But still, wherever you go, you have to adapt it to the specific needs and value set. And I give you a good example. For example, if you go into the Middle East, you will find that patients really expect they have a lot of time spent from the doctor with them. They expect that you really talk a lot to them. They also expect that you involve the family to a much larger degree. into the, caring than you typically do in Western medicine.
Like in some of our privacy laws, almost push away the family.
Absolutely. That is not really an option.
Which would be very obnoxious and rude.
Absolutely, it would be extremely rude to do. And for that reason, so there are really very big differences in that. And for that reason, I think it is extremely exciting to work in this field because you then learn, how different societies find solutions for this. Clearly, managerial aspects of healthcare are at the moment one of the biggest challenges. And we are not very satisfied anywhere in the world with the managerial aspects.
Yes. So do you think there are some things we can learn from, as you said, as a sharing?
Absolutely, because I do think, I'll give you an example. Singapore is a very interesting healthcare system at the moment because they have delivered and have actually developed, as a matter of fact, together with Harvard Medical International,
not through you.
Not through us at all. They did that themselves, obviously, together with Tom Harris, who's one of the leading experts at Harvard Medical International, and a very exciting concept how to deliver healthcare, where they combine it with private aspects of financing, where you pay into a sort of bank loan, and you yourself take out of the bank the amount of money that you want to spend on your healthcare. So you are involved in the decision making with your own pocket, with the own money that you're spending.
Right. And you put in, presumably, during your working years. It's almost like Social Security that we have in the United States, but it's personalized.
It's personalized, and that I think is the very clever aspect of it. You make the decision when you actually want to put this money down. So for that reason, you avoid some of the abuse that you find in a lot of the Western systems, particularly here in Europe, where you feel sometimes that people just go very, very easily because, you have an insurance company, it's not your own money.
Yes.
So they solved that extremely nicely, and they also linked it to some aspect to the pension scheme, because if you don't spend the fund, if you don't need it because you've been fortunately very healthy, it actually at some stage can be converted into a pension scheme, which is a very innovative concept.
So you're very healthier and you can actually use the money to live a little bit better with your good health.
And at the same time, for example,
so it gives you an incentive to be healthy in your retirement. Because then you can be on the beach or whatever.
Absolutely, many incentives in that.
It's fascinating.
That is a very interesting way of solving a lot of the problems. So I would really encourage everybody to look into different solutions that are found in different societies, to find something that suits us all best. And we all know that healthcare will remain extremely expensive, and particularly the process, and in particular the progress we are making in medicine will continue to really desire and need a lot of money to be spent on it.
Well, it's interesting. I think this is extremely important, and in a sense relates to what Jan was talking about in a different scheme of sharing business ideas and best practices. Now we're in the medical. I think it's especially critical on the medical side. I guess I have a bias as a physician by training. But, and I'll be a little bit direct, Samuel Huntington, a very famous Harvard professor, wrote the book Clash of Civilizations. And, I'm not Sam Huntington, but I don't think that was that helpful for the current scheme of things, although as an academic, you want to point out potential problems, etc. And we constantly talk about the clash of civilizations, war on terrorism, etc. And I think it's and we talked about this before, important to recognize that our Western system of medicine, notwithstanding the problems we may have, was essentially inherited through the Arabs. And who then transmitted that from the ancient Greeks through the Middle Ages, while Europe was not, at the advanced stage, and we are very indebted to the Arabs. And in a sense, we are now returning that through in passing the baton, continuing and sharing the baton, I should say, of civilizations. And I think that that's an important message.
Absolutely, and I think it is extremely important to be aware that a lot of the fundamental aspects of our current medicine really do originate from the Arab world. I mean, even up to the 18th century, the standard textbook of surgery was something that was written in the 9th century by an Arab scholar.
And that was the standard textbook in Germany.
And it was the standard textbook in Germany. It was, and no doubt that particularly the Arab world there was far ahead from civilized Europe at that stage. There is no question about it.
So hopefully the work of you and your group, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, and of Jan and his group will completely invalidate Professor Huntington's thesis. And maybe we'll be all the better because of it, and with all due respect to Professor Huntington as well. But thank you so much, Dr. Chris.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure. We're just about to close off. You're watching Eye on Harvard I'm Ogan Gurel. Our guests were Dr. Frank Christ and Jung Hummel, talking about a diverse range of topics, but as you know, actually typical of Harvard, lots of interconnections. We all live in an interconnected world. And this internet television, Eye on Harvard, is a fundamental social communication mechanism of literally Harvardians around the world. Speaking to you from Munich, I'm Ogan Gurel. See you next week. Thank you very much for you.